I felt his hand tighten around mine as we walked toward the grand entrance of the Meridian Hotel. The marble steps gleamed under the evening lights, and through the glass doors, I could see the glittering crowd already gathering in the ballroom. My husband leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered the words that made my stomach clench. "Try not to embarrass me tonight. These people are way above your level." I didn't say a word. I just kept walking beside him, my black dress swishing softly with each step, my heels clicking against the stone. Inside, something twisted, but I'd learned months ago that arguing with him was pointless. He never listened anyway. "Remember what I told you," he continued, straightening his tie as we reached the door. "Smile, nod, don't talk too much about work. Nobody wants to hear about your shifts at the hospital. It's not exactly cocktail conversation. My shifts." He called them shifts. Like I was working the night desk at a hotel or restocking shelves. Not performing complex surgical procedures that saved lives. Not leading a team of residents through 12-hour operations. Not pioneering techniques that would be taught in medical schools for decades. But I didn't correct him. I hadn't corrected him in a long time. It started 2 years ago, right after we got married. I'd come home exhausted from a particularly difficult case. A young mother who'd needed an emergency valve replacement. The surgery had taken 9 hours. My hands had cramped. My back ached. But she was alive, and she'd get to watch her children grow up. I tried to tell him about it over dinner. I needed to talk, to process, to share the weight of holding someone's beating heart in my hands. But he'd been scrolling through his phone, responding to emails from his firm. He was a financial advisor at a mid-sized investment company, and he took his work very seriously. "That's nice, honey," he'd said without looking up. "Sounds like a long day. Did you pick up my dry cleaning?" I'd stopped talking. He never noticed. After that, I tried a few more times. When I was selected to present at the National Cardiothoracic Conference. When I was published in the Journal of Cardiac Surgery. When the hospital board approached me about a research grant. Each time, he'd nod absently, say that's great, and then launch into a story about his own day, his own clients, his own achievements. 6 months ago, I stopped trying altogether. What was the point of sharing your life with someone who didn't want to hear it? Tonight's event was the annual Medical Excellence Gala, a black tie fundraiser that brought together the top physicians, researchers, and donors in the region. It raised millions for medical research and celebrated groundbreaking achievements in healthcare. I'd been attending for 5 years, long before I met him, but when the invitation arrived at our house 3 weeks ago, addressed to Dr. Elena Castellanos and guest, he'd picked it up off the counter and smiled. Finally, he'd said, "My networking with the Johnsons paid off. This is huge for me." I'd opened my mouth to tell him, to explain that the invitation was mine, that it came because I was being honored, that I'd been invited every year since completing my fellowship. But he was already on his phone, texting his boss about the opportunity to connect with potential high-net-worth clients. "I need to make a good impression," he'd said, looking up at me. "This could lead to some serious business. You'll need to look the part." And just like that, it became about him. It always became about him. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in condescension. He scheduled a hair appointment at his preferred salon, telling me my usual stylist wasn't upscale enough for this crowd. He came with me to pick out a dress, vetoing anything too bold or eye-catching. "You don't want to stand out," he'd explained, putting back the emerald green gown I'd loved. "You're there to support me." Elegant but understated, that's the key. He coached me on conversation topics. Avoid politics, obviously. Don't mention anything too technical or medical that might bore people. Ask questions about their work, their interests. Smile. Laugh at jokes, even if they're not funny. Be charming but not too memorable. "These are serious people," he'd said during one of his lectures, 2 days before the event. "Surgeons, hospital executives, major donors. They're not going to want to hear about nursing duties or whatever it is you do in the OR. Nursing duties. Whatever it is I do." I'd spent that afternoon in a 7-hour surgery, repairing an aortic dissection on a 52-year-old father of 3. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and he would have died on my table. Instead, he was in recovery, stable, his family weeping with relief in the waiting room. But my husband didn't know about that surgery. He'd been in meetings all day, and when he came home he'd been too busy rehearsing his elevator pitch for potential clients to ask about my day. Last night, the night before the gala, he'd given me my final instructions. "Tomorrow is important for my career," he'd said, sitting on the edge of our bed while I organized my jewelry. "I need you to be on your best behavior. These people are sophisticated. They're used to a certain level of class and intelligence. Just follow my lead, okay? I'll introduce you around, and you can smile and nod. Let me do the talking." I'd looked at him then, really looked at him, and wondered when he'd become this person, or had he always been this way? And I'd been too busy saving lives to notice. "I'm sure you'll be fine," he'd added, mistaking my silence for nervousness. "Just don't try too hard. You have a tendency to over-explain things. Keep it simple." I turned away, fastening a pearl bracelet around my wrist, and said nothing. Now, as we entered the ballroom, I felt the familiar rush of coming home. This was my world. These were my colleagues, my mentors, my peers. The people in this room had seen me grow from a nervous medical student to a confident surgeon. They knew what I was capable of. They knew what I'd achieved. But the man beside me, the man I'd married, had no idea. We moved through the crowd, and I watched him transform. His shoulders squared, his smile widened. He became animated, confident, working the room like he belonged here. "Beautiful event," he said to a passing waiter. "Must be quite a production to put together." He guided me toward the bar, his hand possessive on my lower back. "Let me get us drinks. You just stand here and try to look like you belong, okay?" I watched him walk away, and something inside me finally broke. Not with anger, exactly. More like clarity. This was my moment of truth, standing in a room full of people who valued me, respected me, celebrated me, while my husband treated me like an accessory he was embarrassed to be seen with. "Elena?" I turned to find Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of cardiology, smiling at me warmly. We'd worked together on dozens of cases over the past 3 years. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady despite everything. "It's good to see you. I'm so glad you're here," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. "This is your night. Are you nervous about the speech?" From across the room I saw my husband returning with our drinks, his eyes narrowing slightly as he watched me talking to Sarah. He didn't know who she was, of course. He'd never bothered to ask about my colleagues, my work relationships, my professional life. "A little," I admitted. "But I've been preparing." "You're going to be amazing," Sarah said. "The Breakthrough Achievement Award is such an honor, especially at your age. That valve replacement technique you developed is going to save thousands of lives." My husband arrived just in time to hear the last sentence. He handed me a glass of champagne, his smile tight. "Honey, aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" The way he said friend made it clear he assumed Sarah was also a nurse. Maybe someone I worked shifts with, someone as unimportant as he believed I was. "Of course," I said. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen, head of cardiology at Meridian Medical Center. Sarah, this is my husband, Marcus." I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes when I said doctor, but he recovered quickly, extending his hand. "A pleasure. I'm Marcus Castellanos, senior advisor at Whitmore Financial. Elena's told me so much about the hospital." Sarah shook his hand politely. "Has she?" "She's being modest then. What she's accomplished in the past 3 years has been revolutionary." Marcus laughed, the sound forced. "Well, she works hard, I'll give her that. All those long shifts." Shifts. There was that word again. Sarah's expression shifted slightly, a tiny crease appearing between her brows. "Shifts? I should mingle," Marcus said quickly, already scanning the room for more important people to network with. "Elena, don't wander too far. And remember what we discussed." He disappeared into the crowd before I could respond. Sarah watched him go, then turned back to me, her expression concerned. "Elena, does he know?" "Know what?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what she meant. "About tonight. About the award. About any of it." I took a sip of champagne, the bubbles sharp on my tongue. "I've tried to tell him. He doesn't listen." "How is that possible?" "Your name is on the invitation. The press release went out 2 weeks ago. You're the keynote speaker." "He thought the invitation was for him," I said quietly. "He assumed he'd been invited because of his networking." I started to correct him, but then he just kept talking, and it became about his career, his opportunity, and I I trailed off, not sure how to explain the slow erosion of my voice in my own marriage, the way I'd learned to make myself smaller and quieter until I'd almost disappeared. I stopped trying, I finished. It seemed easier. Sarah looked at me with something that might have been pity or anger or both. Elena, you're one of the most brilliant surgeons I've ever worked with. You've saved hundreds of lives, you've advanced an entire field of medicine. You deserve someone who sees that, who celebrates that. I know, I said, and I did. I'd known for months. Maybe longer. Well, Sarah said, squeezing my hand. He's about to find out. And frankly, I hope his face when they announce your name is as priceless as I imagine it will be. The next hour was surreal. I moved through the crowd, greeting colleagues I'd known for years, talking about research and new techniques and upcoming conferences. People congratulated me, told me how much they were looking forward to my speech, asked about my plans for the research grant that came with the award. And through it all, I watched my husband network. He worked the room efficiently, introducing himself, dropping names, talking about investment strategies and portfolio management. Every so often, he'd catch my eye and give me a subtle head tilt, a signal to come stand beside him, to play the role of supportive wife. I ignored him. For the first time in our marriage, I simply ignored him and did what I wanted. At one point, he came to find me, his smile strained. I've been looking for you. There's someone I want you to meet, a potential client. Just smile and nod, okay? Don't talk about medical stuff. Actually, I said, I need to check in with the event coordinators. They need to finalize some details for the program. His brow furrowed. What program? The awards presentation, I said. I'll find you later. I walked away before he could respond, and I felt something like freedom in that moment. Something like power. The dinner bell rang, and we all moved toward our assigned tables. I found my seat at the head table, the one reserved for honored guests and award recipients. My name card was there, printed in elegant script. Dr. Elena Castellanos, Breakthrough Achievement Award recipient. Marcus appeared beside me, looking confused. I think there's been a mistake. Our table is number 12. Your table is number 12, I corrected gently. I'm sitting here. Why would you be at the head table? I looked up at him, this man I'd married. This man who'd lived with me for 2 years and knew nothing about who I was. Because I'm receiving an award tonight. He laughed, actually laughed. Honey, I know you work hard, but this is the Medical Excellence Gala. These awards go to top surgeons and researchers. He trailed off, perhaps realizing how his sentence was going to end. I'm what? I asked. My voice calm. You're a nurse, he said finally. There's no shame in that. It's important work. But let's be realistic here. The words hung between us. 2 years of marriage, and he thought I was a nurse. Not because I'd lied or misled him, but because he'd never asked, never listened, never cared enough to know the truth about my life. You should find your table, I said. The program is about to start. He stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to argue, but people were taking their seats around us. He had no choice but to retreat to table 12. Though he kept glancing back at me with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. Dr. James Morrison, the hospital's chief of surgery and tonight's master of ceremonies, took the podium. The room quieted. My heart began to pound, not with nervousness about the speech I'd prepared, but with anticipation of the moment that was coming. The moment when everything would shift. Good evening, everyone, Dr. Morrison began. Thank you all for joining us for the 35th Annual Medical Excellence Gala. Tonight we celebrate not just medicine, but the extraordinary individuals who push the boundaries of what's possible, who innovate, who save lives, and who inspire the next generation of healers. I could see Marcus at his table, trying to look engaged, probably hoping to catch someone important's attention. We have several awards to present tonight, Dr. Morrison continued. But I'd like to begin with our most prestigious honor, the Breakthrough Achievement Award. This award recognizes a physician whose innovative work has significantly advanced their field and has the potential to impact thousands, if not millions, of lives. Marcus was checking his phone under the table. He couldn't even be bothered to pay attention. This year's recipient is someone I've had the privilege of working with for the past 5 years. When she came to us as a fellow, I knew immediately that she was special. Her surgical skills were exceptional, yes, but more than that, she had vision. She saw problems where others saw procedures. She asked questions when others simply followed protocols. I felt Dr. Chen reach over and squeeze my hand under the table. Around me, my colleagues were smiling. In the past 3 years alone, she's performed over 400 cardiac surgeries with a success rate that exceeds national averages by 30%. She's published 17 papers in top medical journals. She's trained dozens of residents who speak of her not just as a brilliant surgeon but as an inspiring teacher. I glanced toward table 12. Marcus had put his phone away and was now watching the podium, probably curious about who this impressive person was. But her most significant achievement is the revolutionary valve replacement technique she developed, which reduces surgical time by 40% and dramatically improves patient outcomes. This technique is already being adopted by hospitals across the country and will soon be taught in medical schools nationwide. The room was completely silent now, everyone focused on Dr. Morrison's words. She's also a devoted advocate for women in surgery, mentoring young female physicians and working to address the gender disparities that still exist in our field. She is, simply put, one of the finest surgeons of her generation, and one of the finest people I've ever known. Dr. Morrison paused, looking directly at me, his eyes warm with pride. It is my tremendous honor to present this year's Breakthrough Achievement Award to Dr. Elena Castellanos. The ballroom erupted in applause. 300 people rose to their feet, standing ovation echoing off the high ceilings. I stood, taking a moment to steady myself, and began walking toward the podium. As I passed table 12, I saw my husband's face. The confusion, the shock, the slow, horrified realization washing over his features as he finally understood. His wife wasn't a nurse who worked shifts. His wife was the guest of honor. His wife was the person everyone had come to celebrate. His face went pale so fast it was almost satisfying. I kept walking. I accepted the Crystal Award from Dr. Morrison, feeling its weight in my hands, feeling the weight of this moment, this validation, this recognition of everything I'd worked for. I took the podium and looked out at the crowd. At my colleagues, my mentors, my residents, my patients' families who'd been invited to celebrate with us. And at my husband, still frozen at his table, looking like he'd been struck by lightning. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady and clear. "Thank you to Dr. Morrison, to the award committee, and to all of you for being here tonight. This honor means more to me than I can express." I spoke for 15 minutes. I talked about my research, about the patients who'd inspired me, about the incredible team I worked with every day. I talked about the little girl I'd met during my residency, born with a heart defect, who'd survived 3 surgeries and was now a healthy 10-year-old because of advances in pediatric cardiac surgery. I talked about the importance of innovation, of questioning established methods, of never accepting that this is just how we've always done it. I talked about being a woman in a male-dominated field, about the mentors who'd believed in me when others doubted, about my responsibility to open doors for the women who would come after me. I did not look at my husband once during that entire speech. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. People came up to congratulate me, to shake my hand, to tell me how inspiring my words had been. Hospital administrators talked about expanded research funding. Colleagues from other institutions invited me to present at their conferences. Medical students asked if they could shadow me during surgeries. And through it all, I saw Marcus trying to make his way through the crowd toward me, his expression a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been anger. When he finally reached me, I was talking with Dr. Chen and Dr. Morrison about a potential collaboration with Johns Hopkins. He stood at the edge of our circle, waiting for a break in the conversation, looking increasingly uncomfortable as medical terminology flew over his head. "Elena," he finally interrupted. "Can we talk? Privately?" "Actually," I said, not even looking at him, "I'm in the middle of something important, perhaps later." His jaw tightened. "I really think we should talk now." Dr. Morrison raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, are you the husband? Marcus, was it?" "Yes," Marcus said, trying to recover his composure. "I was just telling Elena earlier how proud I am of her work at the hospital." The lie was so blatant, so absurd, that I almost laughed. "Really?" Dr. Morrison said, his tone politely skeptical. "Because I could have sworn I heard you telling someone at your table that your wife was a nurse." The color drained from Marcus's face for the second time that night. "Elena's been working on this research for 3 years, Dr. Chen added, her voice sharp. I'm curious how you could be proud of work you apparently didn't know existed. Marcus looked at me, perhaps hoping I'd bail him out, smooth things over, play the supportive wife role he'd assigned me. But I just stood there, holding my award, saying nothing. I think, I said finally, that we do need to talk. But not here. Not now. This is my night, and I'm going to enjoy it. I turned back to Dr. Morrison and Dr. Chen, effectively dismissing him. After a moment of awkward hovering, Marcus retreated. The rest of the evening was wonderful. I networked, I laughed, I felt seen and valued and celebrated. Several donors approached me about funding expansion of my research. The dean of the medical school asked if I'd consider a teaching position. A publisher inquired about writing a textbook on advanced cardiac surgery techniques. I didn't see Marcus again until the event was winding down. I found him in the lobby, alone, staring at his phone. Ready to go? I asked. He looked up and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. Elena, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? And there it was. Even now, even after everything, he was making it my fault. I tried, I said quietly. For 2 years, I tried. But you never listened. You never asked. You never cared enough to know who I actually am. That's not fair, he said, his voice rising. You should have been more clear. How was I supposed to know you were some big deal surgeon? Some big deal surgeon. As if that was the point. As if the issue was his failure to recognize my professional status, rather than his failure to see me as a complete person. You thought I was a nurse, I said. For 2 years, you thought I was a nurse, and it never occurred to you to ask for details about my job. You never asked what procedures I performed, what cases I worked on, what my days were actually like. You assumed you knew, and you never bothered to verify those assumptions. But you let me think. I let you think nothing, I interrupted. I told you, repeatedly, about my work. You didn't listen. You'd nod and say that's nice and then talk about your own day. After a while, I stopped trying. Why share your life with someone who doesn't want to hear it? He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. So what? This was some kind of test? Some elaborate game to make me look stupid? No, I said. This was me living my life, achieving my goals, doing my work, while you were so absorbed in yourself that you didn't notice any of it. This wasn't about you, Marcus. That's the problem. You've made our entire marriage about you. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me one thing about my research, one paper I've published, one surgery technique I've developed, one patient story I've shared. Tell me anything about my actual professional life beyond the fact that I work at a hospital. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing. That's what I thought, I said. We drove home in silence. When we got to the house I'd bought with my salary before we even met, the house that was in my name alone. He tried again. Look, I messed up, okay. I should have paid more attention. But we can work through this. We can go to counseling or something. I set my award on the entry table, next to the mail. I've been thinking about this for a while now, I said. Tonight just made it clear. This isn't working. We aren't working. You can't be serious. You're going to throw away our marriage over this? I'm not throwing it away, I said. It was never really there to begin with. You married an idea of who you thought I was. Someone small and simple who would reflect well on you, who would support your career and not have ambitions of her own. But that's not who I am. It never was, so that's it. You're just done? I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No love, no anger, not even disappointment. Just emptiness where a marriage should have been. I have a surgery scheduled for 7 tomorrow morning, I said. A triple bypass on a 60-year-old grandfather. His family is terrified. I need to be rested and focused because his life depends on me being at my best. I don't have the energy for this conversation right now. Elena. There are extra blankets in the hall closet, I said. The guest room is all yours. I'll call my lawyer tomorrow. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and finally allowed myself to feel everything I'd been holding in all night. Not sadness exactly, but relief. The relief of finally being seen, even if it took public recognition for it to happen. The relief of knowing I didn't have to keep making myself smaller. The relief of choosing myself. I changed out of my evening gown and into comfortable clothes. I looked at myself in the mirror. At this woman who'd spent 2 years being invisible in her own home while saving lives in the operating room. I thought about the patient tomorrow, about the responsibility I carried, about the privilege of being trusted with human hearts. And I thought about my own heart, which I'd been guarding and protecting without even realizing it, which had never really been his to break because I'd never truly given it to him. My phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Chen. You were magnificent tonight. Proud to call you my colleague. And my friend. Another from Dr. Morrison. That speech will be talked about for years. Thank you for being exactly who you are. And one from a resident I'd mentored. Dr. Castellanos. Thank you for showing me what's possible. You're the surgeon I want to be. I smiled, set my phone aside, and went to bed. Tomorrow, I had a life to save. And tonight, I'd saved my own.